ahead and get started, and we will admit people as they come in. Thank you for joining us today for our next installment of our Friends of HSF Alumni Speaker Series. We're so excited to connect our alumni directly with our students to share their insight on specific topics. Today we will hear from alumna Bethanys Journey regarding how the Florida Department of Education has worked to support our education system during COVID and guidance on ways we can use the CARES Act to benefit our students. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. If you submitted a question today and it goes unanswered, please feel free to submit the question via the chat feature. If time allows, we'll be submitting these questions to Bethany live. Our student moderator for today is Molly Rhymes. Molly is from Fort Myers, Florida, majoring in political science. She is involved with the Social Science Scholars and the Torchlight Student Research Institute, and she's also involved in a congressional race this summer. Thank you for being here, Molly. I'd now like to introduce our guest for this afternoon, Bethanys Journey. Bethany serves as the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Florida Department of Education, as well as the Executive Director for the Florida Education Foundation. As a third-generation military brat who has lived in 17 different communities from pre-K to post-secondary, her family's commitment to public service formed her professional ethos to produce high-quality work to improve both individuals and communities. For the past 12 years, she has been serving Florida's communities in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors. Most recently, she was the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Florida Department of Education. Previously, Bethany was Leadership Florida's Member Services and Resource Development Manager, and before that, she was an account manager at a top-tier public relations and an advertising firm, the Zimmerman Agency, where she managed 3 global accounts. Most importantly, however, she holds the title of daughter, sister, aunt, friend, and guardian ad litem, and Floridian. Bethany is a graduate of Florida State University, where she received her Bachelor's of Science in Public Relations and has a Master's in Nonprofit Management from the University of Tampa. Thank you for being here, Bethany, and I will now hand it over to Molly. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome, Bethany. Before we get started, participants, please know that you can submit a question in the chat to our hosts. Feel free to ask any questions there, and we will do our best to get to them. I'd like to start by asking you, Bethany, to share briefly a little bit about your journey to your current position at the Florida Department of Education and briefly touch on the challenges COVID has presented in preparing for this next school year for not only universities, but also K through 12.
Thanks, Molly. First, I want to start off by thanking everyone for spending their afternoon with us, and hopefully this is worth your time. So please, if you have extra questions, put them in the chat. We'll make sure to answer them at the best as we can. And I actually just see my old boss from FSU is actually now joining the room, Lisa McGrady. So I'll first answer that question in 2 parts. 1, about my journey of how I got here, and 2, how it's affected our work at the department and our lives at the Department of Education, for what you just asked. So as you guys heard, listening to that bio, I need to cut that a little shorter. But yes, I'm a military brat. Florida State brought me back from Utah to go to college here. I thought I was going to leave Tallahassee quickly after graduation, but that is not the plan that God had for me. So I graduated with a public relations degree, and I had an opportunity to go to DC and work in a senator's office, or go private in a PR firm and work in hospitality and get to travel. And at 22, I was like, of course I want to go travel and go to different cool areas. And I didn't know what type of PR I wanted to do. I just knew I loved Dr. Gilmer and Rayburn and all the people at FSU, and went and did that for several years. And then finally something was tugging at my heartstrings, and I wanted to do something more. And I thought I was going to Atlanta, and actually the answer was right here in Tallahassee, where I got to work at a nonprofit called Leadership Florida, where we focused on bringing together statewide leaders of different industries and educating them on issues that they could come together and find solutions. In that, I always say it's almost like my own little master's in that program. I learned about a lot more of the issues that face our state. That also really drew me closer to education. And I was given the opportunity to come over to the Department of Education to run their foundation, as well as then a couple of months later, the new commissioner, who's the current commissioner, Richard Corcoran, moved me over to legislative affairs. And that's how then I ended up more in a policy lobbying role. So very not traditional when you talk about being a lobbyist. And I always joke, because it's the truth, I said a month before I got asked to move over to somebody, I was like, I'll never be a lobbyist. Let me run your foundation, and you do that. We'll be a great team. And I had to call them up and say, well, I now registered to lobby. So I still get to do 2 hats and work in that nonprofit world, as running our foundation with the great team we have, but also still helping with the policy efforts. So that then leads me to where we're at now, I think, with COVID and how it's totally transformed our day-to-day life, both personally and professionally. For ourselves, we have a foundation that we realized we had all these summer events that we were trying to do, bring our teachers together to do professional training, bring the top STEMs juniors together in the state and high school. And we realized you can't meet in person. And so we had to move some things virtual. We had to use some of our funds to we did mini grants that we gave out to nonprofits, charters, and school districts to help them with distance learning in the spring when we transitioned, as well as what we're currently working on. We have a grant for $100,000 to help with internet access, and something we can talk about a little bit later, because I know that's been a big component and issue too with education right now, and not all have the access to resources at home that all of us, at least myself, I know I got to go back into when teleworking, or if you're working in a school setting. When you look at the policy area, I'm sure all of you have seen some of the news. Florida has, gotten a lot of attention, both from the president, the vice president, from other states asking us what we're doing. And there's also, opinions going around in a lot of different ways on how we should move forward in the education system. So we did a calculation, about 70% of my job now is connected to COVID and related to figuring out the reopening plans, to making sure we have, we're following the right policies, thinking of how we need to move forward when we talk about those different policies too, and supporting our team and our districts and whoever it might be to ensure that they have the best education that we're really in Constitution stated that we need to do in law, but also what in a moral compass and a moral heart that I know the team here really is focusing on to do the right thing for our students and our parents and really our community members. So that's kind of a lot, but I hopefully hope that answered the first question.
Yes, thank you so much, Bethany. And to kind of expand upon the COVID part, we have some more questions related to that the participants did submit for you today. So let's start with, what has changed, if anything, to your guidelines for opening, given the recent substantial daily spikes in cases?
So our official guidance came out June 11th. And one thing to get clear, the Florida Department of Education, our purview is early learning, K through 12, and then the college system. So the college system are the 28 different colleges like TCC or Santa Fe. The university system is controlled by the Board of Governors, which is right above me in my office, and they are a separate entity. So they had their own guidance and recommendations that they worked with universities. But for us, when we came out with our plans on June 11th, it was really more of official guidance and recommendations. And what we really wanted to do in the forefront is say, what are the ways that we're measuring success, and really how are we going to make sure we have our decisions? And we've always gone back to show compassion and grace. That should be where we start. And that's also where we're at now, even with the spikes and new testing and whatever, anything else, we all realize we have to be flexible. So that's something that's going to remain a constant, but we realize we have to be nimble, knowing and using the data we have. But we recognize too, even in June 11th, that it's not a one size fits all in the state. Florida is unlike majority of any other state in the nation. We are so diverse. We have so many different, student populations, if it's a rural district too, or if it's an urban district, whatever that might be. So for us, our guidelines have really remained the same. And I go back and look at our 146-page document. I can put a link up to it. I actually have it up right here. So I'll put a link up to it in the chat if people want to look through it. And it's 2 prongs where we have, hey, this is all the data that we use to inform our decisions. Achievement gap, it's going to be an issue. The realities of schools are not set up to be social distance. What it means for, some of our low income and minority family members that what they're dealing with. And then we went into our recommendations for schools to consider for opening. And we think it should be a local decision because, like I said earlier, it's not a one size fits all. So work with your local Department of Health, work with your families. A lot of school districts we even see this week have been doing surveys of their parents and saying, hey, do you want to send your kids back? Do you want to do virtual? And we're seeing majority across the state, people want to send their students back in face-to-face. But that's not all, and that's totally fine too. So I don't think our plans have totally changed. We did have to do an emergency order on July 6th, so almost a month later. We recognize funding is an issue. And the way that our laws are written, that it states for at least K through 12 specifically, students have to be in class 180 days a year in face-to-face instruction. And that's how they're funded based on their full-time equivalent, we say. That's why attendance is a big deal. When you're in high school or elementary, you might remember attendance day. It's probably the day that we're doing a survey across the state and checking to see where all the students are at. But if some districts are going to use some innovative learning approaches where they're not face-to-face 180 days, they wouldn't get paid exactly the full amount of what they would have gotten paid in the classroom. And we realized that might not be something that everyone can do. So we gave them the flexibility to saying, let's have a plan. Let's make sure you have reassurances that you're taking care of our students with disabilities. You're taking care, of your teachers and giving them options, and you're giving parent options, and you're really thinking through what's best for your community and what access you have. And once they have those approved plans, which are due in 2 days, and I think we have 40 in as of today, and 17 are approved across the state, then we're going to make sure that you're doing everything that you can do and providing that right education. So I guess overall, I said I would be kind of quick, but Lisa McGrady, who, if any of you want to be a university ambassador, you should go do it. It's the best job ever. I will still say it's my favorite ever. She knows I ramble, so that hasn't changed at all. So if anyone has any questions about any more on that, let me know.
Yeah, so thank you. And to expand a little bit further on some of the things that you mentioned, how does the possibility of schools opening up in the fall affect lower income communities, as well as the achievement gap for students most affected by the pandemic?
So we just hit on one size fits all that great stuff. But when you really look at the data, which we're big nerds here at the department, and our commissioner, somebody too, wants to make sure let's look at the facts and figures and make decisions based on that. Florida is going just our K through 12 public school, 62.6%, so about 63% of all of our students are minority. And that same amount, 63%, live in low income houses. So when you're looking at how our lower income communities are affected and the achievement gap, unfortunately, those things are parallel. We recognize we have a lot of work to do. In Florida, over the last 16 years, there's this test that every state does. It's called NAEP, and it tests math and also reading and a couple other things in 4th and 8th grade. And in the last 16 years alone, Florida has maybe made a couple progress in both 4th and 8th grade, but then maybe declined. And currently right now, 4th graders, I think if I remember, it's 62%, I think, of 4th graders are not proficient in reading. In 8th grade, it goes up to 67. So it actually gets worse as we go on. And so we know there's been a lot of work in the achievement gap, and that is not something that that COVID has helped. COVID is going to make us widen our achievement gap, because you all probably heard something called the summer slide. And so the summer slide essentially is when students go home from the summer, they're not getting instruction every day, and they come back and they forget it. Same reason why I tell all my interns, always have a notebook in your hand, because I'm going to tell you to do something and you're going to come back and you're not going to remember an hour from now, even though you think you will. It just doesn't happen, right? And so when you think of it in that way, we've now had students that some have gone distance learning and never checked in because maybe they didn't have internet at home, and maybe they just weren't that engaged, whatever it might be. But so these gaps are going to widen. And unfortunately, we've seen things like because they didn't have internet, and that's in a lot of our low income households. So we're looking at ways to make sure that doesn't happen in the fall if, students aren't able to go face to face in their different communities. So we know for a fact too, 35% of low income households with school age children didn't have high speed internet. And we keep getting some of these facts, and that's part of an issue, right? And it's a part of a conversation too, that we get to have an opportunity to find a solution, but I think it's intertwined with your achievement gaps. And I think for us, a big focus that we'll continue to try to lean into is reading and literacy. I'm dyslexic. It didn't come out until college. Very easily, that's the truth, because I moved around and it was very easy for me to find ways to kind of work the system essentially. But I keep going back, reading this data and understanding how important it is to read at 3rd grade, not only alone 4th grade, and what that means for your graduation rate and what that means to go to a university like FSU or to a college. And it's a big deal. So I think we're going to really have to focus on early literacy, and also give additional supports to those students that are in really critical transitions, like kindergarten to kindergarten, going into high school, as well as high school to college. And that's a big transition for anyone's life. I mean, all of us on this call have done it, and we recognize it's sometimes, it's a big part in life. So making sure that our students have all of the support systems that they need, both on an educational level, but I also think on a internal mental health level as well. Does that kind of answer everything?
Yes, Thank you. Yeah, you answered, above and beyond. And to pivot a little bit, how often does the Florida Department of Education and schools specifically work with their school psychologists? So do the school psychologists work in a particular county, or are they assigned to a particular school?
So that's a hiring decision on a district level. So we're very much a local state control state. And so districts get to hire their, whether it is a psychologist on campus or a school counselor. And for the state total, I think this year we have about one of those for every 300 and maybe 6 of our students across the state. And so districts will hire individually their counselors or their psychologists and make sure that they meet the requirements in law. As a department, though, of education, we work with them very thorough on their making sure they have continued professional development, giving them support systems. A big component we recognize has been mental health. And I think this is also going to be something that we have to focus even more and provide in more of an innovative way, like telehealth and telemedicine. When I saw FSU has a telehealth whole portal. And that's also one of the reasons why this last year, the legislature, before COVID, already appropriated additional $25 million to this, to a total of $100 million for telehealth and mental health. Really mental health, but telehealth will be a part of it. And so we've done, I think, since COVID, I at least saw on the different websites, and I can share our website with everything. I think there's 2 or 3 webinars specifically for those guidance counselors and psychologists of giving them feedback of, hey, when you do a one-on-one Zoom meeting with somebody, a student, you probably should have a clear background, make sure it's not busy. They might, distract them. And interesting things that I wouldn't have even thought of because I'm not a psychologist or a counselor. And then there's also some of the more of the detailed conversations of, we recognize too that the hotlines for abuse and the hotlines for suicide and those different things that have gotten, typically called out when you see people face to face has declined. And I know it got mentioned, I'm a guardian ad litem. They're estimating that right now cases are pretty high, but once we start going back to school and we, pivot to this new reality that we're all in, that they're going to skyrocket. And so we really have to lean in as a community, I think. And that means the department for us, we have to continue to give whatever guidance and supports we can to those counselors and psychologists, but also allow them to work at a local area of what's best for them. And the Department of Family and Children Services too, they're really big and component of providing some of those services when it talks about mental health, different students and people like that. So if anybody has any, needs to talk to anybody or anything like that, and you're an FSU student, I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat. I think I might have had it up. If not, I put it in my notes because FSU has a wonderful telehealth and psychologist. And I know you can go as a student and get free psychology, I think sessions, which is definitely something I always say. I think all of us need a therapist. I don't have one right now, but I definitely could use one. But it's not something we typically will like cheer on and announce, but I think it's one of the most important topics we have to get right, because if you're not mentally in the right place, how are we ever going to expect you to be able to take on education and take on a job and take on the other things in life that you need to be able to be a whole and healthy person.
Thank you. And I was just wondering if you could clarify, what is the difference between a school psychologist and a school counselor?
So a psychologist is going to have different degrees, and a counselor as well. So your psychologist is going to have gone to a university and probably have a bachelor's or more than maybe a master's in psychology. Your counselor are going to have different trainings. I'm not technically savvy on exactly what it is. I can find that and send it to it if anyone's interested on that. But it's going to be really your education and how you get certified. So those are, if I'm remembering the statute right, it's like 10-12-01, I think. Yes, that's it, because that's from teacher pay. And it's instructional personnel for the school. And then depending on the details of that, depending on what your qualified are when you were getting certified, is if you could be a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist.
Okay, thank you. So then pivoting back to the more COVID-related parts, if testing is a big part of the reopening plan, how is it effective without continual testing for all individuals?
So The state of Florida has done a really great job at testing. We're testing a lot. We're learning every day. You know, there's the rapid test, there's the PNC or PCN, I forget now, test. And we're learning something new every day. Like I just said, sorry, I'm repeating myself. And it's going to go the same way, I think, for our school system of how they're going to start implementing testing. I read through your FSU plan. If you haven't read through it, you should all read through it. This is your reopening plan that your Board of Governors, or we say BOG here, approved, I think in early July or maybe June. And at least for FSU, they're saying, hey, we're looking and we have a goal that we'd like to test every student and every staff before they come onto campus. And hopefully before they enter, they have to have a COVID clear test 10 days prior. And that's going to be something that they're offering, you know, to set up a drive-through. And if somebody has, through contact tracing, think they've been in contact with somebody who might have had COVID, then allow them to, you know, get testing for free on campus. That's going to be different for how, you know, each local school district decides to work on testing. In our reopening plan, we did have a slide on, you know, what we would least suggest to recommend or consider for testing. That necessarily doesn't have, I don't know where it is. I'll have to find the slide for you guys, but that necessarily won't be the same across every university, every college campus, or every elementary school. So it's going to be something that testing, I've already known people who've gotten multiple times. I've been very lucky and haven't had to get it, but I know I'm planning to get it in August. So it's going to be a personal as well as an institutional thing that they're going to probably control, with making sure they're being smart about it, and setting goals that can be reached as well, which I think FSU has done a really good job outlining in their plan of how they're planning to do that on campus.
Thank you. So then, yeah, kind of following up on the heels of that, will FSU be required through the Florida Department of Education to conduct contact tracing?
So it's a two-pronged answer. One, the Florida Department of Education, like I just said, we're not officially over FSU. That's the Board of Governors, and they've given out their own recommendations. And I don't believe the Board of Governors have said you have to do contact tracing, but it is something that actually as a state, they're just doing, as a nation, we're doing. And if anyone needs a job, there's actually a lot of people that are hiring for it. And I know in your FSU plan, you guys did identify both for athletes as well as for students that there will be contact tracing. And that's something you work with through your Department of Health. And we gave guidance on it. It's slide 62, because I did actually take a picture of that one for this one. In our opening plan of consider making sure schools are figuring out the right contact tracing. So it starts with, you know, you find somebody with it, you have to contact and figure out everyone they've come in contact with, interview them, see if really they were in touch with them, let the, you know, track their health progress, monitor them, maybe go get them to take a test, or go, a lot of the times if you've been in contact with somebody in COVID, part of the tracing is you need to go pretty much home for 14 days in quarantine. And then once you get through those 14 days and probably get a test, and if you're negative and you have no symptoms, you're good to return to normal. But it goes back to tracing back from that first case. And that first case, you have to do it with everyone that they might have come in contact to, but you also need to make sure that you are letting your local health department know. And then if it's immediate, like the day of, say somebody walks in my office and said, hey, I have a fever and I'm not feeling good, and I'm a student, I can't drive, I'm going to put you in a room probably, you know, by yourself, and we're going to call the right people to pick you up and go do the right things that need to be done. So I that will look different very much than in a K through 12 school where majority of those students can't drive versus a university, and FSU will be implementing it. And I think you're going to see it across the board. I mean, that's one of the best testing, and contact tracing is going to be a part of our daily life for the time being until we can get a vaccine.
Sorry, and thank you. And so continuing on the FSU thread here, for students interested in starting a new club or organization at FSU in the upcoming fall semester, what safety guidelines and measures would you suggest be taken as a group in order to maintain the safety of all participants in the larger FSU community?
So part of the academic experience is not just in the classroom, it is also part of that social interaction. And I know I got just as much, if not more, out of things from different clubs and organizations being a part of FSU. So I know how important that is to continue. So I first would challenge you to find ways that you can do things like this. Amy and Molly, y'all have done a great job prepping, and I think you've done a couple of these with your honors students. Finding ways that you can be socially distanced and in a safe manner is great. I also think when, I'm not sure if FSU will allow big social events, and if that's going to be something that will happen immediately. Eventually it will. It's probably going to be taking small measures of let's try to do an event outside, maybe on Landis and not in a small room, Landis Green, not Landis Hall, right? Also monitor the people that are coming and ask them like, hey, if you feel bad or if you have a fever, like, don't come. We've seen them a lot of the times too. Actually, maybe bring a thermometer. If you're talking about having a new club start this year too, that's a whole nother layer, because existing clubs already have, I know FSU is going to start at a slow, we could say a dimmer switch approach, letting some social gatherings and social events still happen, but that will take it, I think, it won't happen immediate essentially. And they're going to let the existing organizations meet. To being a new organization and starting a new club, I think it's your student services center that I would go and work with and see if it's something that makes sense to open up and start this fall. Or if it's something you think you could, at least get everything together and do in the spring, or maybe even the summer when you might not have some of those barriers of what we're dealing with, to make sure we have the right social distancing. And we've given recommendations on this. The CDC has recommendations on groups and social gatherings too. So I highly recommend trying to take a look at that as well.
Thank you. So then what programs, if any, are being developed to assist the incoming freshmen who have been impacted by COVID in their senior year of high school and now first year of college?
So that's probably the hardest one to answer. And I've gotten a lot of calls, and we've tried to do a lot of things for our seniors, both from college and from high school, because class of 2020, you are a record. I mean, you're a part of the history books that we've not seen a real high school class. I mean, yeah, we can go back to 1918 when there was a Spanish flu, but I think society's a lot different too now. So you talk about your prom, and you talk about your graduation and those ceremonies. I know through the Florida Education Foundation, we partnered with the Florida Lottery, and we try to get good videos of, I know we had Tom Brady, who's our new Floridian in the state, and he did a commencement speech, and we got a couple others, I think Will Smith and things like that. I've tried to still have a celebration. And then when you really talk about the transition from high school to FSU, that doesn't really fall on us as much as we probably would have liked. I've always said my one biggest regret at FSU is not being an orientation leader. So if you have that opportunity, do it. Selfish plug in. But I think it's going to be connecting with how they're doing their orientation and how are they connecting. And I think a big part of that is we've already, as our generation has been I think you guys are maybe just a little bit younger of a generation. I'm a millennial. I should know what generation I'm in, I guess. But online, right? And I think you're going to see more engagement, I think, with students that are moving from high school to college, connecting that way, and probably a lot more of the advisors, as well as the, the counselors on FSU's campus too, and the how orientation and those things, and even I know like recruitment for sorority or fraternity, and how you're going to start joining different clubs this fall if you are a new senior. I'm hoping that those different organizations are thinking about how they can still engage those freshmen. Because to be totally transparent, I hated FSU the first couple months, and it wasn't until I got involved with things like university ambassadors, Garnet and Gold Guides, joined a sorority that I was like, okay, now I have a social and I get it. So I think that's really important. And I think that's going to be really something that we'll need to be focused on. I don't have the answer exactly how that will be done, though.
Thank you. And so next we have some questions for students about the CARES Act.
Mm-hmm.
So one says that she is currently an FSU student struggling to make ends meet who has been forced to take out student loans. This has been the direct result of being denied CARES Act funding by the Office of Financial Aid because of the way their family's EFC was calculated on the FAFSA. How can they prove their circumstances to them, open a line of communication, and receive much needed support of this fund?
So I did get this one before, so thank you, because this one I did not know. And one of my favorite things about my job is we get asked questions and we're here to answer them, and I get to learn something. So I'm going to read this one off so I'm not saying it wrong, because we have the Office of Financial Assistant and Aid, OSFA, and Pete Hernandez, who's amazing. So whoever this is, I'll actually chat Pete's name in here. You can email Pete and he'll help you with this specifically. So essentially how it works when you apply for the FAFSA, they use last year's taxes and they determine what you're eligible for. So it sounds like they probably used last year's taxes from your family. Things have drastically changed since last year. That happens a lot, not just because of COVID. So there is something called a special circumstances / professional judgment, where essentially you can put in and say, hey, I think this needs to be relooked at, and you're able to provide them with different documentation. But you should also really work through the financial aid office at FSU, and they should be able to help you with this to make sure that's happening, as well as provide you different opportunities to knowing where there might be other scholarships or grant opportunities that might help you with some of these financial strains that you do take on going to, a higher ed institution, but are totally worth it in the investment in your education in the end. So I will actually get Pete's email, and if the person's on, you can just email him directly. You can email me too if you don't want to talk to him, and we can make sure you get taken care of and get to go through that process.
Thank you so much, and thank you for providing those resources. And so as a follow-up, can you explain a little bit more on what the CARES Act covers and how it assists college students? And how do students receive any funding assistance through the CARES Act, which I think you covered a lot of just now.
I think I just chatted the stuff in the thing for the last question. Yeah, CARES Act. Big umbrella vision. The CARES Act has billions upon billions going across the nation. In Florida specifically, we have about $2 billion coming in that are education related. And it's broken down into a couple big main buckets. One, there's a bucket that helps our early learning providers. Two, there's a bucket that also then helps our K through 12 system. And then there's also a bucket that does help our higher institutions, as well as, and that's going to be our colleges, our career tech, and well of university students. And I have it here because I was like, let me get that exact number. For higher ed alone, it's about $873 million came in. And for the 12 universities alone, it's $286 million that came in. And by law, 50% of that $286 million that came into the state has to go directly to the students. So a lot of students were given, and I think a lot of adults too, were not only given a stimulus check of, I think $1,200 was the baseline, and then it went down depending on your income. But university students also would automatically receive checks to help support them. On top of that, what the CARES Act did for a lot of our higher ed students is it suspended a lot of our student loan payments, as well as allowed there to be no interest in loans from about March, I think, until September of 2020. And then as well as helped with employer contributions towards student loans to help them. So that's a big component. If you have loans you have to pay. Typically that's going to really impact the students who just graduated though, because that's when a lot of times your loans are due. And then it also, the other funds that the university that didn't go direct to the student, that's helping your university maintain open and also get some of those supplies that they need to do and spend it on ways that they need to make sure they're setting up the campuses for the safety and welfare of the students that are coming back. I think of per head, when you look down at all of the funding at a university, it was about $400 or $500 a head everyone got. And for college system, we got about $300 and some per head. There's a really good chart that explains all this in our reopening plan on probably like slide 120 that I would look at. And if you have questions about CARES Act, because it's a very complicated thing, and I still have questions every day in all transparency. And they're also considering doing another CARES Act package, which there are discussions of having funding to go, additional funding to go to higher ed, which that would also then need potentially the students. So there might be additional resources hopefully coming. They might extend the loan programs, they might not. So I would stay tuned and just make sure you're keeping up with your media and what's happening in your legislation, both federally and locally as well.
Thank you so much. And that actually concludes the questions that were pre-submitted. And so we actually had a couple come through from people on the chat. So we're going to start those. How has the Florida Department of Education managed to sort through all of the misinformation and opaqueness that surrounds COVID-19 within the state?
That's a good question. I mean, how do we do this on a daily before COVID, right? We have social media, we have media, we have individuals who are, you know, have a spotlight and are influencers and able to say things. And we always say, as we've all heard, perception is reality. That is not changed because of COVID. That's still the same. And there's a lot of different perceptions of going out. And that's okay, because you're allowed to have different perceptions. We say not everything, one size doesn't fit all. And that goes, I think, in life and in politics, personally and professionally too. For us, it's trying to be 100% transparent as much as we can. So I constantly talk to our director of comms, Taryn Finsky, who we graduated at FSU together. We weren't that good of friends, but now kind of now glued to each other's hips, because our worlds, we have to make sure we're telling the policy components and our stakeholders the same thing to the media, because we want to make sure we're all on the same page. And for us, there's an internal component where we really do share as much as we can and try to educate our staff on what's happening and why. The really good books start with the why. That's important. And then also going above and beyond when we're getting asked questions. And then that also means going above and beyond when we're not asked questions and we see something that's wrong. So 2 examples on that. People will reach out about Bright Futures right now. That's a big component. We were able to extend Bright Futures deadline to July 31st and waive some of the requirements for the volunteer hours. We've worked really hard with SAT and ACT to get testing, because students need to take the test to qualify. ACT was able to get 19,000 students tested in June and July. SAT unfortunately decided not to do a test. It was out of our control. And out of the nation, Florida had the most ACT test takers. And we're really hopeful that those test takers are gonna have gotten the scores that they needed to qualify. But there's a lot of, we get emails every day like, it was canceled and I wasn't able to test. So I'm like, well, that's actually, there was ACT and there were these options. And it might not be the answer that everybody specifically wants from us, but we always want to be honest and give it. And we're going to go above and beyond. When somebody asks me a question about Bright Futures and why the test was canceled, I'll actually explain to them, well, SAT, yes, never decided. ACT did, but ACT, yes, they had to cancel some sites, but they allowed students to relocate to another site free of charge. And then if they were canceled the week before, which that was the second wave of cancels, ACT actually reached out to seniors and set up to have additional 500 students take a test on Saturday. More than all of you want to hear, but at least that's the way we go upon it in this department of, we're going to give you not only a yes or no answer, we're going to go above and beyond and explain more layers to it, because sometimes that's where there's the misconception. And the same thing happens, I think, in the media, in a lot of different places, where we'll see somebody say something on a tweet or something, and Taryn will be like, let me call that editor and explain and give them the backup and show it's different. I've reached out to my own teacher friends who have said different things on Facebook. I said, hey, let's talk. Let me explain like our teacher pay component that just passed. Over 50% of veteran teachers are going to get a pay raise. It's not just for new teachers. So that's a part of, I think, the way that we've been able to slowly get through the misinformation. But I give my cell phone out probably too easily. And our team we're pretty good on email and whatnot. So if people have questions, we're here to answer. And we also, on our website that I shared earlier, it has every single thing we've sent out, all the webinars we've done, all the plans, all the emergency orders. There's more things than any one person will ever probably sit down and read, but at least it's there if they want to Google it, and the word will hopefully come up and they can find some of those answers that they need.
Thank you. So we have another question. Hey, Bethany, are you able to share the easiest link to the overall FDOE guideline resource?
Yes, I am. I thought I had shared it, but I think I might have shared the wrong one. So here it is. It's in the chat. When you look at it's really 4 parts and a half, I will say. Part 1, again, is our insights of the data, which we really nerd out in here. Part 2 is the guidance and recommendations for how to reopen and what to consider for early learning all the way to college and post-secondary. Part 3 are the implementations about the CARES Act, giving you a summary. And then Part 4, actually, we are able as a department and through the governor's component of the CARES Act, it's about $400 some million that we were able to decide how it's going to get spent. And a lot of that is actually getting spent to initiatives to help with the achievement gap and with those critical transitions that I mentioned. So it has all that information. But what's really handy, and our chief of staff actually did this man didn't sleep for a month doing this PowerPoint and us all editing it. There's an appendix that if you look at it, it's like an Excel chart, and it says all the different topics, and it tells you if there's an X, if that topic, like here's medical vulnerabilities. There's stuff about for childcare, K through 12, higher ed. These are the pages it's on. Here's where the source came from. It was the CDC. And there's about 20 different areas in this Excel chart, not 20 actually, it looks like 4 on this whole PowerPoint that talks about medical vulnerabilities and how to deal with it. So if you're looking for a really specific topic, maybe it's testing, contact tracing, you can actually go to that appendix and go pinpoint what slide it's on, and also find a link to find additional resources for you as well.
Thank you. So we have one more question. How can students advocate for their peers who are facing additional educational or financial challenges due to COVID?
I love Advocate. We're doing a big civics thing, and I realized I would have really loved to maybe go and do a speech and debate. And I know, Molly, you're interested in working maybe in public service as well and advocating for things. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of ways to do it locally, statewide, or nationally. You can first and foremost reach out to your representative and your senators. You can reach out to your local officials, if that be your mayor or county commissioners. But also could be picking up the phone and or writing out an email saying, hey, this is what I'm worried about, and these are the reasons why. Like, can you help and sit down and maybe talk to me? Maybe it's through a Teams though. And I think it's through relationships and discussions, but also being intentional with it and thoughtful for how you're going to reach out. And I think really for advocating, and if you're going to do it and you're passionate, and this is a topic you should be passionate about, of how do we make sure we're setting our students up for success with this, understanding, knowing like what are you really asking, what are the issues. And I would first say, this is a good learn from one of my bosses, is if you're going to ask something or you're going to bring up a topic, make sure you know enough about it at least. So at least do a little bit of a Google search and a little bit of a research so you can have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation on it before you start asking those questions too. And if you can't find anything, then ask. And I always say the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So that's what I would at least do. Start the conversations.
Thank you, Bethany. So I think those were all of our submitted questions, and then the pre-submitted questions. And I think you did a great job answering the wide variety. They were all across the board. So we appreciate that. And we appreciate the resources too. And while I'm talking here, if you can think of any more resources you want to pop in the chat that might be helpful for our participants, please let me know. Thank you, Molly, for moderating the discussion today. We greatly appreciate, Bethany, you spending the time to share your experience and knowledge with us. And if anybody thinks of anything else after this that they'd like to send, please feel free to email me. I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and I'll be happy to get with Bethany and we will answer those questions for you. Also, if you logged on late and wanted to rewatch to catch any answer, this recording will be posted on our Friends of HSF Facebook and YouTube starting tomorrow. So please look for that if you're looking to rewatch. Lastly, be sure to keep an eye out on social media for our future speaker series during the summer and throughout the fall. Our next speaker will be August 12th at 2 p.m. featuring alumna Rima Nathan, and she'll be discussing how to be involved in all FSU has to offer. So thank you everyone for joining. And real quick, I just saw in a chat, we have one final question. So actually, Molly, I think it might be in your chat. So let's get that answered for our participant before we sign off here today, if that's okay.
Yeah, so the question is why tuition would not be lowered because the campus would barely be used?
Is it saying why is tuition not being lowered because campus is barely being used?
Yes, I think they mean because of the fees that we all have, for campus related things there.
Yeah, so I know that was a tuition and fees are a big component. I'm a little bit more privy to college fees and tuition. Those things are actually set in statute of how tuition and fees, are set and how you change them. So it's not as simple always of just saying we're going to go through and change and lower things because one, there's different process of if they have to go through their board through FSU or whatever it might be. And two, I think the colleges and universities have been looking at this and recognizing that. And I think that's one of the reasons when I think FSU just had a register, was it last week again for classes? So your fees will be different, but your tuition for those online courses, I'm assuming, I'm sure they have information on this, but that's also why I think we recognize, and the federal government recognize, how are we going to give those different resources to continue the financial supports that can happen with the CARES Act, and why they're looking forward to helping again more if they are able to pass another CARES Act package 2.0, whatever you want to call it. So I would definitely just go look at your registrar's office and when your classes you register to see what those different prices are if you're concerned about it. And then also, you know, talk to and advocate if you're interested in those questions, your financial resource, financial aid office, and have questions and ask them too if they, you know, can give you any light on what FSU is talking about. They could be, they could not be. I'm not privy yet really those discussions at this point.
Well, thank you for answering the best that you could. We have one more question actually that came in too. Would delays to starting schools impact the number of school days this year?
So it's still in law, 180 days, a certain amount of hours. So a majority, it's similar to hurricanes. When we have to close schools for hurricanes, we're really used to that. That's also why I think Florida did great with our transitioning to distance learning. Those days will have to be made up. So essentially they're going to be moving back the end of their school year. So say you're going to start August 10th and you're going to get out May 10th, you're starting now August 31st. That's probably going to be your school's not going to get out until May 31st. So we recognize your instruction time. That's so important, and those days and those hours are set in statute and rule for a purpose. And so we're still going to make sure that our students are getting that high quality instructional time that they deserve. And it's the laws and the rules that help us make sure that we're following those things.
Awesome. I think that is finally it on the submitted questions. And for anyone that has additional questions, please feel free, like I said, to email me, and I'm more than happy to connect with Bethany to get those answered. As I'm sure you can see by the chat, she's very open to sharing all of her resources that she can. So if anybody has any last minute questions, please feel free to send me an email. Again, thank you everyone for logging in. And if you missed it or logged in late, please look for the video coming out tomorrow. But thank you, Bethany, and thank you, Molly. And I hope everyone stays well and has a good evening. Thanks.
Bye guys, take care.